An Australian soldier carved 3 wooden boomerangs and his squadmates laughed, calling it the dumbest weapon idea they'd ever heard, until the jungle exploded with spinning blades at 60 Molotov ace and 15 Japanese soldiers dropped in 3 seconds flat. What ancient hunting technique did Corporal Jack Thompson turn into the deadliest trap of the Pacific War? June 1945, Burma. The rain never stopped. It fell in sheets through the jungle canopy, turning the ground into thick brown soup that sucked at boots and made every step a battle. The trees grew so close together that a man could barely see 10 feet ahead. Vines hung like ropes from branches overhead. The air smelled like rot and wet earth and something else, something metallic that soldiers learned meant death was close by. This was where Britain's 14th Army fought the Japanese, deep in Southeast Asia where the rest of the world had forgotten them. They called themselves the Forgotten Army, and they were right. No one back home talked about Burma. No one sent extra supplies or fancy equipment. The men here fought with what they had, which was never enough. Malaria killed more soldiers than bullets did. Food came on mules when it came at all, and sometimes the mules died before reaching camp. Every single day was a fight just to survive, and that was before the enemy even showed up. The Japanese knew this jungle better than anyone. They moved through it like ghosts, silent and invisible. They could walk right past a British sentry and the poor man would never hear a thing until the knife went into his back. They set traps that were so clever, even experienced soldiers fell for them. They attacked at night when the rain was loudest and no one could see their hands in front of their faces. And they never, ever gave up. Even when they were starving and cut off from supplies, they kept fighting with a kind of fury that terrified the Allied troops. In this nightmare world, Corporal Jack Thompson of the Australian 7th Division was about to become either a hero or a laughingstock. Right now, his money was on laughingstock. Thompson was 28 years old, tall and sunburned, with hands that were scarred from years of hard work. He had grown up in the outback of Queensland, way out where there were more kangaroos than people. His father had taught him to hunt, and the Aboriginal trackers who worked on nearby stations had taught him something even more valuable. They taught him how to make boomerangs, the real kind that actually came back when you threw them. Not the tourist junk sold in cities, but proper hunting tools carved from ironwood and shaped just right, so the air would catch them and bring them home. When Thompson joined the army in 1942, he brought that skill with him. During quiet times in camp, he would carve boomerangs from whatever wood he could find. His squadmates thought it was funny at first. They would gather around and watch him throw these curved sticks that would sail out 50 yards and then swing back to his hand like magic. It was a neat party trick, good for a laugh when everyone was bored and scared and trying not to think about the next patrol. But Thompson saw something his friends did not see. He saw a weapon. The idea had come to him slowly over months of fighting in the jungle. Every time they set up camp, they put out tripwires and mines to warn them if the Japanese were coming. But the enemy had figured out how to spot those traps. They would send one man ahead to look for wires, and he would find them and cut them, and then the whole patrol would slip through like smoke. The Australians would wake up with knives at their throats, or not wake up at all. Thompson kept thinking about how a boomerang moved through the air. It did not go straight like a bullet. It curved and spun and covered a wide area. And if you made it heavier and sharper and stopped it from coming back, if you launched it sideways instead of up, if you put enough force behind it, well, then maybe you had something interesting. Maybe you had something that could hit multiple targets at once in a space where rifles were almost useless because you could not see far enough to aim. He tried to explain this to his sergeant one day after a particularly bad night. The Japanese had come through their perimeter before dawn and killed 4 men, good men, while they slept. Everyone was angry and scared and looking for answers. Thompson thought this might be his chance. "Sir, I got an idea about the tripwires," he said. "What if instead of mines or alarms, we set up something that hits them from the side? Like a boomerang trap?" Sergeant Davies looked at him like he had suggested fighting with a slingshot. "A boomerang," Davies said slowly. "You want to kill Japanese soldiers with a boomerang?" "Not thrown, sir. Rigged, spring-loaded. I can make it so when they trip the wire, these sharpened boomerangs shoot across the path at neck height. The spin would make them cut through everything in the way, and the Japanese walk in tight lines, so... Boomer, Davies interrupted, using the nickname everyone called Thompson now. This ain't the Stone Age. We got grenades, we got mines, we got machine guns. And you want to set up a bloody stick trap like you're hunting rabbits back home? The other men burst out laughing. What's next, Boomer? Gonna beat them with sticks and stones? One soldier called out. Maybe we should all get toy slingshots, another added, wiping tears from his eyes. Stupidest thing I ever heard, a third muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. Thompson felt his face get hot, but he kept his mouth shut. He knew how it sounded. He knew they thought he was crazy, and his idea was stupid. But then June 14th came and changed everything. That night, another Japanese patrol slipped through their defenses. This time, they did not just kill. They took equipment, destroyed supplies, and vanished, before anyone could react. They had walked right past every trap and alarm like those things did not even exist. The next morning, Davies pulled Thompson aside. The sergeant looked tired and old and beaten down. "Your boomerang thing," he said quietly. "You really think it would work?" Thompson nodded. "Give me 2 days and the right materials. I'll show you." Davies stared at him for a long moment. Then he sighed. "You got 48 hours, Boomer. Make me a miracle." Thompson had his 48 hours, and he was not going to waste a single minute. He worked like a man possessed for the next 2 days. He barely slept and hardly ate. His hands moved constantly, carving and testing and adjusting. The other soldiers watched him with a mix of curiosity and pity, like they were watching someone build a sandcastle while the tide came in. No one really believed it would work, but at least Boomer was trying something, which was more than anyone else had done. The design was more complicated than anyone expected. Thompson started by finding the right wood, which took half a day. It had to be ironwood, the hardest timber in the jungle, heavy enough to carry momentum, but not so heavy it would drop immediately. He found a fallen tree near camp and spent hours cutting 3 pieces, each one 18 inches long and curved just right. These were not regular boomerangs that came back. These were killers, weighted and sharpened along the leading edge until they could cut through a man's arm with one good swing. Next came the launcher mechanism, and this was where Thompson's hunting knowledge really showed. He used bamboo because it was everywhere and incredibly strong when bent correctly. He cut 6 thick bamboo poles and lashed them together to make a frame, then bent 3 of them backward until they were under enormous tension, like a bow pulled back and ready to fire. Each bent pole held one boomerang in place, locked and loaded. The whole thing was about 5 feet tall and camouflaged with leaves and mud, so it looked like just another clump of jungle undergrowth. The trigger was the trickiest part. Thompson attached a tripwire at ankle height that ran across the path where the Japanese liked to walk. The wire was made from salvaged parachute cord, thin and almost invisible in the shadows. When someone's foot hit that wire, it would yank a wooden peg out of the bamboo frame. The peg was the only thing holding back all that stored tension. Once it came free, the bamboo poles would snap forward with massive force, launching all 3 boomerangs simultaneously in a horizontal arc. That was the key detail that made Thompson's trap so deadly. The boomerangs would not fly straight ahead like arrows. They would sweep sideways across the entire width of the trail, spinning at incredible speed, about 60 miles per hour according to Thompson's calculations. And because of their curved shape, they would cover a 12-foot wide kill zone, which was wider than any jungle path. Anything in that zone when the trap fired would be hit, and probably multiple times, because 3 boomerangs spinning through the same space created an overlapping field of destruction. On the morning of June 16th, Thompson finished his installation just before dawn. He stepped back and looked at his work. The trap was perfectly hidden. Even he had trouble seeing it, and he knew exactly where it was. The tripwire was invisible against the muddy ground. The bamboo launcher looked like natural vegetation. If you walked past it without knowing it was there, you would never suspect a thing. His squadmates were less impressed. "Looks like a pile of sticks," one said. "This is the stupidest trap I've ever seen," another declared, shaking his head. A third soldier pointed out that even if it did fire, The boomerangs would probably just bounce off the trees and fall down. "World's most complicated failure," someone muttered. 2 days wasted on Boomer's stupid boomerang idea. Sergeant Davis did not say much. He just nodded and told everyone to take positions 40 yards away, hidden in the brush, where they could watch the trail. Intelligence said a Japanese patrol was coming through this area tonight, probably around 20 men strong. If Thompson's trap worked, great. If it did not, well, they would deal with the patrol the old-fashioned way, with rifles and grenades and luck. The waiting was the worst part. The sun went down and the jungle got dark. The kind of dark where you could not see your own hand. The rain started up again, drumming on leaves and making it hard to hear anything else. Hours passed. Mosquitoes swarmed so thick the men had to breathe through their teeth to avoid inhaling them. Soldiers shifted in the mud, trying to stay comfortable, trying to stay awake, trying not to think about what might happen if the Japanese spotted them instead of the trap. Then, at 3:47 in the morning, they heard something. Boots in the mud, moving carefully, but not silently. Whispered commands in Japanese, too quiet to understand but unmistakable in their urgency. The sound of equipment creaking, rifles being adjusted, men moving in formation. The patrol was coming. Thompson held his breath. His trap was 50 feet away, invisible in the darkness. He could not see it. He could not see the trail. He could not see anything except the vague shapes of trees against the slightly lighter sky. He just had to trust that he had built it right, that he had positioned it correctly, that the Japanese would walk where he expected them to walk. The footsteps got closer. Closer. Someone coughed quietly. Someone else whispered something sharp, probably telling the first man to shut up. They were right on top of the trap now. Thompson could picture them in his mind, moving in their usual tight single-file formation, hunched low to avoid being silhouetted against the sky, watching the ground for mines, never expecting danger to come from the side. Then the jungle exploded. The sound was like a gunshot and a whip crack combined, the noise of bamboo releasing all its stored energy in a fraction of a second. But that sound was immediately drowned out by something worse. Something Thompson would hear in his nightmares for the rest of his life. It was a whistling shriek, high-pitched and inhuman, like a demon screaming. That was the boomerangs cutting through the air, spinning so fast they produced their own horrible music. Men started screaming, not war cries or battle shouts, but pure terror and agony. The darkness lit up with muzzle flashes as the Japanese opened fire in every direction, shooting blindly, hitting nothing but trees and each other. Something heavy hit the ground with a wet thud. Then another. Then several at once. Someone was crying in Japanese, begging for help, or maybe for his mother. Someone else made a gurgling sound that stopped abruptly. Then silence. Just the rain drumming down and the sound of Thompson's own heartbeat hammering in his ears. He realized he had stopped breathing and forced himself to take a breath. His hands were shaking. Next to him, one of his squadmates was muttering a prayer under his breath. Sergeant Davis did not move at all, just stared into the darkness where the screaming had been. They waited until dawn to move in. No one wanted to walk through that killing ground in the dark, but when the sun finally rose and revealed what Thompson's trap had done, they understood why the screaming had been so terrible. The scene that greeted them in the morning light was something out of a nightmare. Bodies lay scattered across the trail in positions that made no sense, twisted and broken in ways that did not look real. Some men had fallen where they stood. Others had crawled a few feet before dying. Blood covered everything, soaked into the mud, splattered on trees, dripping from leaves overhead. The smell was terrible, copper and waste, and something sweet that made Thompson want to throw up. 15 Japanese soldiers were dead or dying. 3 more had been killed by their own side's bullets during the panic. Only 2 had escaped into the jungle, and they had left a clear trail of blood behind them. The Australian squad moved through the carnage slowly, checking bodies, collecting weapons, trying to understand what had happened in those 3 seconds of chaos. One of the boomerangs was embedded in a tree trunk, buried 3 inches deep in the solid wood. It was still vibrating slightly, humming like a tuning fork. The impact had been so violent that cracks radiated outward from where the boomerang had hit, splitting the bark in a spiderweb pattern. Thompson reached out to touch it and then pulled his hand back. He was not sure he wanted to touch something that had done this. Another boomerang lay in the mud, covered in blood and other things Thompson did not want to look at too closely. The third one had apparently bounced off several trees. Before finally coming to rest 30 feet down the trail, its edge chipped and bent from multiple impacts. The spinning motion had turned each boomerang into a saw blade, cutting through anything in its path. Men had been hit in the neck, the chest, the head. Some had been struck multiple times as the boomerangs tumbled and ricocheted through the tight formation. Sergeant Davies stood in the middle of the killing ground with his mouth open. He looked at Thompson, then at the bodies, then back at Thompson. His face was pale and his hands were shaking slightly. "Jesus Christ, Boomer," he whispered. "What the hell did you build?" Thompson did not answer. He could not find words. He had known the trap would work in theory, but seeing it in practice was different. This was not like hunting kangaroos back home where you aimed for a clean kill and the animal died quickly. This was messy and horrible and wrong in a way that made his stomach turn. These had been men, soldiers like him, and now they were just broken meat on the ground. But he also could not deny the numbers. 15 enemy soldiers dead. His entire squad alive. If the trap had not worked, if the Japanese had gotten through again like they always did, it could have been Australians lying here instead. War did not give you clean choices. War gave you terrible options and made you pick the least terrible one. The news spread through camp by mid-morning. By noon, officers were examining Thompson's trap, taking notes, asking questions about how he built it and how much force was needed and whether it could be made bigger or smaller. By evening, engineers had arrived with measuring tools and cameras, documenting every detail of the design. They poked at the bamboo frame, tested the trigger mechanism, measured the angles and distances, and calculated the physics of how much energy was stored in those bent poles. Within a week, Thompson's boomerang trap had become standard procedure across the 14th Army's positions in Burma. Engineers made improvements, replacing ironwood with metal when they could find it, using steel springs instead of bamboo for more reliable tension. But the basic design stayed the same because it worked. It worked terrifyingly well. Japanese forces started calling the traps spinning ghost blades, according to intelligence reports. Captured prisoners talked about them with fear in their voices, describing how men would be walking along one moment and then simply fall apart the next, cut down by invisible demons. Enemy patrols began avoiding trails they had used for months, taking longer routes through worse terrain just to stay away from areas where the traps might be hidden. Their movements became more predictable, easier to track, easier to ambush. By July, an estimated 80 Japanese soldiers had been killed or wounded by boomerang traps. Australian casualties in sectors using the traps dropped by 40%. Thompson's invention was saving lives, lots of them, and everyone agreed he was a hero. They talked about giving him a medal. Officers shook his hand and called him brilliant. His squadmates who had laughed at him now treated him with respect, bordering on awe. But Thompson himself felt something else entirely, something he could not quite name. It sat in his chest like a stone, heavy and cold. At night, when he tried to sleep, he kept seeing those bodies on the trail. He kept hearing the screaming. He kept thinking about the fact that he had created this thing, had designed it specifically to tear men apart, and it had worked exactly as intended. He had grown up hunting for food, and his father had taught him the rule: always aim for a clean kill. Make it quick. Make it merciful. But what he had built was not merciful. Men hit by his trap did not die instantly. Some of them had lived long enough to scream, to beg, to understand they were dying. That felt wrong, in a way Thompson could not explain, but felt deep in his bones. One night in late July, he found himself talking to the unit chaplain. The chaplain was a thin man with kind eyes who had seen enough of war to know better than to offer easy answers. Thompson sat across from him in a tent that smelled like canvas and lamp oil and told him everything he was feeling. "I made it to protect my mates," Thompson said quietly. "And it worked. It saved lives, our lives. But I keep seeing their faces, the Japanese, I mean. They did not even know what hit them. They were just walking along, and then they were not anymore. Is that courage, or is it just cruelty? because sometimes I cannot tell the difference." The chaplain was quiet for a long time. Rain drummed on the tent roof above them. Somewhere outside, someone was singing a song from home, sad and slow. Finally, the chaplain spoke. "War asks us to do terrible things for good reasons. That does not make the things less terrible. It just makes them necessary. The question is not whether you should feel bad about what you built. The question is what you do with that feeling. Do you let it make you cruel? Or do you let it keep you human?" Thompson thought about that. He thought about his mates who were still alive because of his trap. He thought about the Japanese soldiers who were dead because of it. He thought about how both things could be true at the same time, and how that was the terrible math of war. You added up lives saved and lives taken, and tried to figure out if the equation balanced, knowing it never really did. In August, 2 weeks before Japan surrendered, Thompson received the military medal for his invention. The ceremony was simple, just a few officers and his squad gathered in a clearing. A British colonel pinned the medal to his chest and made a speech about innovation and courage. At the end, the colonel smiled and said, "Remind me never to mock an Aussie bushman again." Everyone laughed. Thompson smiled, but the expression did not reach his eyes. "Just do not forget what we learned, sir," he said quietly. "Old methods are not stupid. Sometimes they are just waiting for the right war." But in his head, he was thinking something else. He was thinking about how easy it had been to turn something from his childhood, something innocent, into a killing machine. He was thinking about how thin the line was between cleverness and brutality, and he was thinking about whether he would ever be able to pick up a real boomerang again without seeing blood. Thompson sailed home to Australia in December 1945 on a troop ship crowded with men who could not wait to leave the war behind. They played cards and told jokes and talked about what they would do first when they got home. Some wanted beer, some wanted their mother's cooking, some wanted to see their wives or girlfriends or children they had not met yet. Everyone had a plan for how normal life would start again, as if normal was a switch you could just flip back on. Thompson did not talk much during the voyage. He spent most of his time on deck, watching the ocean roll past, thinking about things he could not put into words. In his duffel bag, wrapped carefully in an old shirt, was one of the original ironwood boomerangs from his trap. He had gone back to the jungle site before leaving Burma and dug it out of the mud where it had fallen. He was not sure why he kept it. Maybe as a reminder, maybe as a warning. Maybe just because throwing it away felt wrong, like pretending none of it had happened. When the ship finally docked in Brisbane, Thompson walked down the gangway with hundreds of other soldiers into a crowd of families waiting with signs and flowers and tears. His own family was there, his mother and father and 2 younger sisters, and they rushed forward to hug him all at once. His mother kept touching his face, like she needed to make sure he was real. His father shook his hand hard and said he was proud. His sisters talked over each other, asking questions about everything. It should have felt perfect. It should have felt like coming home. But Thompson felt like he was watching it all happen to someone else. The sounds were too loud, the colours were too bright. Everyone was smiling and happy, and he did not know how to be that way anymore. He had left Australia as a young man who knew how to hunt and track and survive in the bush. He was coming back as someone who knew how to kill efficiently, how to turn everyday objects into weapons, how to calculate the math of death. That was not the same person, and his family could not see the difference yet. They drove him back to the family farm outside of Cairns, 3 hours north through country that looked exactly like he remembered. Red dirt roads, eucalyptus trees, kangaroos hopping away from the truck, fields that stretched to the horizon under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Nothing had changed here. The war had not touched this place. It felt like walking into a museum of his old life. Everything, preserved exactly as he left it. His father had kept Thompson's room ready for him. Same bed, same posters on the wall, same collection of boomerangs hanging above the dresser. His mother had saved his favourite foods. His sisters wanted him to tell them war stories, the exciting kind where heroes saved the day and everyone was brave. They did not understand why he changed the subject every time they asked. The first few weeks were the hardest. Thompson tried to fall back into farm routines, helping with the animals, fixing fences, doing the 100 small tasks that needed doing, but his hands would not stay still. He kept looking over his shoulder. Loud noises made him jump. At night, he dreamed about the jungle, about the screaming, about bodies twisted in the mud. He would wake up gasping and have to remind himself where he was, that he was safe, that the war was over. His father took him hunting one morning, thinking it might help. They walked out into the bush before dawn like they used to, tracking kangaroos. When they found a mob grazing near a waterhole, his father handed Thompson the rifle. It was a perfect shot, easy, a big male at 70 yards with no wind. Thompson looked through the scope and put his finger on the trigger and then stopped. He could not do it. He lowered the rifle and shook his head. "I cannot," he said simply. His father did not push. They walked back to the truck in silence and never went hunting again. Thompson realized something important that day. He had spent his whole childhood learning to hunt, learning to read the land and the animals, learning the Aboriginal skills that had made him useful in the war. But the war had taken those skills and twisted them into something he did not recognize. He could not separate the old knowledge from the new memories. Every time he thought about tracking or trapping, he saw Japanese soldiers dying. The two things were connected now in a way he could not undo. So he stopped hunting, but he did not stop teaching. That became his new purpose, the thing that kept him going. He started offering free workshops for local youth groups, teaching kids how to make boomerangs the traditional way. He showed them how to find the right wood, how to shape it correctly, how to throw it so it would come back. He talked about Aboriginal culture and respect for the land and the importance of learning old skills even in a modern world. He never mentioned the war unless someone specifically asked. When they did ask, usually older kids who had heard rumors about what he did in Burma, he would get very quiet. "I learned that clever thinking beats big weapons sometimes," he would say carefully, "but I also learned that you have to live with what you build. Every invention has a cost, and sometimes that cost is not worth paying." The kids did not always understand what he meant, but that was okay. Thompson was not really talking to them anyway. He was talking to himself, trying to work through things. He still did not fully understand. He was trying to figure out if he was a hero or a killer, or somehow both at the same time. Years passed. Thompson got married to a teacher from town. They had 3 children. He ran the farm after his father retired. He became known locally as the Boomerang Man, the guy who knew all the old Aboriginal techniques and taught them to anyone who wanted to learn. Most people did not know about his war service. He did not bring it up, and his family learned not to ask. In 1978, a military historian tracked him down for an interview. By then, Thompson was 61 years old, weathered and quiet, with grey in his beard and scars on his hands from decades of farm work. The historian wanted to know about the boomerang trap, about how he had invented it, about what it meant for military tactics. Thompson answered the technical questions, but avoided the personal ones until the very end. "Do you regret it?" the historian finally asked. "Do you regret building the trap?" Thompson was quiet for a very long time. He looked out the window at the fields where his children's children were playing. He thought about all the men who came home from Burma because his trap had worked. He thought about all the men who did not come home, Japanese men, who died on a jungle trail because of something he designed. Both groups had families. Both groups had people who loved them. The only difference was which side they fought for. "I saved my mates," he said at last. "That is what soldiers do. But I think about those Japanese boys too, all the time. They were just soldiers like us, doing what they were told, fighting for what they believed in. I do not regret stopping them, because that was my job, and if I had not done it, my friends would have died instead. But I will never forget that they were human. They had mothers and fathers and maybe wives and children. They were not demons or monsters. They were just men, and I killed them with a toy from my childhood." The historian did not know what to say to that. Thompson died in 1993 at the age of 76. His original ironwood boomerang, the one he had carried home from Burma, was donated to the Australian War Memorial in Canberra. They put it in a display case with a long plaque that explained what it was and how it worked and how many lives it saved. The plaque ended with these words: "Innovation in warfare comes from unexpected places. Corporal Jack Thompson proved that ancient wisdom could turn the tide of modern battle, but at a cost measured in more than enemy casualties." His family attended the dedication ceremony. His children stood in front of the display case, looking at that piece of curved wood behind the glass. It did not look dangerous. It looked like something you would find in a toy store. But they knew what it had done. They knew what it meant. Thompson's oldest son, who had heard some of the stories over the years, stood there for a long time just staring at the boomerang. Finally, he turned to his siblings and said something his father had told him once when he was young and asking about the war. Dad said the hardest part was not building it or using it. The hardest part was knowing it worked.